And then Veronica, if you want to try to hit record on the Spanish side.
All right. Let me know once I can admit the waiting room people.
Let's go ahead and let them in then, Chisa, and then that way we'll let everybody get connected, and then we'll let Jennifer make the announcement. Thanks, everybody. And Jennifer, it looks like everybody has audio connected.
Welcome, everybody. Bienvenidos a todos. We do have interpreting services available, and I'm going to give this announcement in both Spanish and English so you can know how to access the interpretation. En español como en inglés para usted saber cómo acceder a la interpretación. Para seleccionar su idioma, si está usando su dispositivo móvil, puede tocar su pantalla, seleccionar los 3 puntitos, seleccionar interpretación de idiomas y luego español o Spanish. Y para finalizar su opción, favor de seleccionar finalizado o done. Y si está en su computadora, puede ubicar el globo que está en la parte inferior de la pantalla, hacer clic en el globo, seleccionar español y luego listo. Y todos tienen que escoger un idioma, si no, no pueden escuchar toda la conversación. Gracias. So we do have interpreting services available. In order to select your language, if you're using a mobile device, tap on your screen and select the 3 dots, select language interpretation, and then English. And to finalize, select done. If you're using a computer, you'll see a globe on the bottom part of your screen, and click globe and then English and done. Everyone should select a language, otherwise you won't be able to hear the whole conversation. Thank you so much.
Great. Isabella, did you want to go ahead?
Hello, thank you to everyone who took time out of their evening to discuss this very important discussion on the state of parking in our city. My name is Isabella Tapia, and I'm the management intern with the Public Works Department who's been assisting with this project. Tonight, throughout this project, Julie Dixon, who she is, what Dixon does, and the project scope. At the end, we'll open up to community questions and input for anyone who has any lingering clarifying questions. So with that, Julie.
Great. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. And thank you all for joining us, especially during this busy time of the year. We know that parking is an impactful discussion in your community, and we're grateful to have you here. For anybody that attended the previous meeting that we had in person, this will be the same presentation, and we will have time for questions at the end of this very brief presentation. I just really want to reinforce the importance of hearing your feedback and impacts as it relates to parking, especially in your residential neighborhoods, and as we talk about parking in the city of San Fernando. So as Isabella mentioned, my name is Julie Dixon, and with Dixon Resources Unlimited, I have been in the parking and transportation industry my entire career, and we work with communities similar to San Fernando that are impacted when it comes to parking management, especially in our neighborhoods. We know that there are a significant number of accessory dwelling units that have been built out in and around the city, and that's something that does have an impact in your neighborhoods. And it's one of the many factors that we want to tie into how we mitigate and manage parking moving forward. I'm also going to try to be very mindful of the fact that our colleagues are translating my presentation here today. So I'm trying to speak slowly and deliberately to ensure that everyone receives the information here clearly. So it's important when we talk about parking and parking management in the city is to really understand not only how we got to where we are today, but really the direction that we're heading in. I'm sure all of us can appreciate the housing impacts that are happening not only throughout the country, but especially here in Southern California. And as we talk about those ongoing impacts, how we're going to really mitigate and manage the curb and making sure that there's enough parking available for all of us and the people that we live with. A lot of things have changed in what used to be kind of our typical household. Now, with the cost of living, we have multiple families, multiple generations living in the same household, which in a lot of cases means multiple cars as well. And so that's something that we want to talk about as we navigate how we're going to manage parking moving forward. That can include potential changes to maybe existing policies. Maybe you have permit regulations that aren't necessary anymore, or maybe you live in a place that actually needs regulations. And that's really when we talk about the strategy on how we want to manage parking moving forward in San Fernando. It's something that we want to be sure that we're doing incrementally as we consider those opportunities. And that's why tonight's discussion is so important, because we want to hear from you, the residents who live in the community, to understand how parking affects your quality of life and where you live, so that we can come up with a holistic solution that's going to work for the community as a whole. And this is an important project as we talk about how to move forward, because what we want to avoid is basically what we call Band-Aid solutions. We don't just want to kick the, can down the curb. We want to make sure that we're looking at this strategically, so that we're not just pushing an issue from one side of the street to the other, or from one neighborhood to the next, because we don't want to just push a problem from one area to another. We really want to get to the core root and really accurately address what is the impact. And most importantly, we want to use data to be able to effectively recommend decisions and recommendations moving forward, so that we can really make it easy for people to follow the rules and make it easy for you able to find a parking space near your residence. So when we talk about this particular project, it's one that is very specific to focus on the residential permit parking program and some of those neighborhoods that doesn't have a permit program, but may be in a need for a program. So what you see here on the right side of the screen is what we call the study area. I'm going to share with you today some of the data results from the data collection that was collected basically in September, after the school year had begun, so that we really could try to measure the occupancy and effect during what we would call a typical time of the year, not during winter break or summer break, but really kind of when we're all leading what I would call kind of our normal average life, a day in the life of, what it is to be a resident of San Fernando. We're also looking to not only evaluate the existing locations and potentially other impacted locations, but overall developing the guidelines and processes and how residential parking can or should be managed in and around the city as we consider the impacts in the community. During the in-person meeting, we heard from several residents with very different experiences as it relates to their residential parking needs. And that's what's really important, is we need to really kind of peel back the curtain and hear from everyone, so that we can truly come up with a plan that's realistic, that is going to work for the community. And that's the reason why community engagement is such an important part of today's conversation. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about the survey and how important it is that community members respond to the survey that's been posted, because it's your feedback that is really going to influence the direction of how parking is managed in the city. Because one of the things that we know is that we have the impacts of the developments in our residential neighborhoods, and we need to consider the excess or overflow parking, as well as considerations for public safety. We have some neighborhoods where community members are having to park great distances from their home and being able to walk back at night. Factors like that, those are all things that we want to be mindful of as we talk about how to navigate this project. So in terms of the project schedule, we actually kicked this project off right at the beginning of August. And what we did is we met with city staff to understand how parking is managed in the city from the internal standpoint. And then I mentioned that we did data collection in September. We did data collection on September 12th and on September 14th, basically a weekday and a weekend day, so that we could have a good sampling of what the occupancy levels are like in the various neighborhoods on that map that I shared with you on the previous screen. And we're going to talk about that data. And where we are in the project right now is our first round of community engagement, where we're receiving resident feedback, community member feedback, so that we can really help influence and affect the recommendations. And then we've also posted the citywide online survey that is live today. And I'm going to share with you the link and the QR code for that survey in case you haven't taken it yet. And then we continue to meet with the Public Works team. You met Isabella earlier and Kenneth, who works with her. So that's an important part of this project, is to make sure that we stay engaged with city staff as well, so that we're ensuring that we have realistic recommendations. Now, I mentioned that we're in round 1 of the community meetings. It's important to understand that this is not where the participation ends. As we take your feedback, the survey results, and kind of go to the drawing board to develop recommendations and a game plan for San Fernando, we need to come back and talk to you again so that we can really get your response and feedback to the recommendations. Now, mind you, it might not be a perfect fit for all of your challenges, but as you'll hear tonight, everyone has maybe some different needs. So when we come back, we really want to take that holistic approach when it comes to those recommendations. So that's an important part of this process, is making sure that we circle back and really kind of close that loop on the discussion, so that if we need to make any more adjustments or amendments before we take this forward, any recommendations to the city or city council, we want to make sure that the community has weighed in on those ideas and on those concepts. So I'll leave this screen up for a moment so that in case if anybody wants to take a picture of the screen, you can also find this information on the city's website as well. And that website information will be located at the end of the presentation. But what we'd like to have is all residents to go in and fill out this survey to share what your experience is with parking in San Fernando. It's available in both English and Spanish. And this survey will be posted to solicit your information, and I'll have more details on this, and we'll leave the QR code up on the screen at the end of the presentation, as well as knowing that you can also access this information on the city's website. So now let's talk for a moment about data. And let me tell you one of the reasons why data is important as we talk about this project. In the parking industry, when you are at 85% occupancy, it basically means you're near or at capacity, and it's when the city needs to consider to start to manage parking differently. So what we did is, as I mentioned, we came out and did data collection using license plate recognition technology to be able to capture the license plate information on vehicles to identify not only how long they've stayed, but how many cars have stayed in that location. Now, it's important to understand when I talk about license plate recognition technology, also known as LPR, it's important to understand that what we're merely doing is collecting the characters on the plate. There's no looking up of anybody's information. I don't know that that car belongs to Julie Dixon or if that car belongs to Isabella. The reality is we're simply using that as a marker for that car so that we can understand how long vehicles are parking by individual block face and in the different collection zones. Something else that we utilize as we talk about this data collection process is utilizing drones. Drones are particularly important in this project because it gives us that bird's eye perspective so that we might be able to identify potential opportunities for parking options that maybe exist on private property or maybe underutilized parking lots for nearby locations. And this is particularly important when we talk about the recommendations moving forward. because oftentimes in communities similar to yours, we're able to leverage something called a shared parking agreement, where you might be able to utilize a nearby parking lot at a church or maybe a bank that closes at 5 o'clock. And these are the opportunities that we want to seek out as we navigate this project. What you can also see in the bottom left-hand corner are the actual space counts for each of the zones that we collected data from. And that basically means how many on-street parking spaces there are in each of those zones. So I mentioned 85% occupancy, and there's quite a few things here on the slide, and I want to highlight this. On the right side of the slide, what you see is the results from the data that was captured on Thursday. And what you can actually see here, color-coded, is what the occupancy numbers were by block face. And you can see that color red is to indicate that we had occupancy at 85% or greater. And then as you look around and you kind of see that rainbow of colors, you can see that there's within a block, typically an available parking space within these locations. The overall average occupancy for the entire study area was 75%. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise that the highest average occupancy in these areas were 5 a.m. and 10 p.m. collection times, which again is typically when people are at home, either enjoying their households or asleep. The highest average occupancy observed at 10 p.m. was in the non-residential parking permit zone or non-RPP area as highlighted here, and that average was at 87%. So again, I'm sure this comes as no surprise to all of you, but we have some occupancy challenges, and that's really what we have to be able to navigate in terms of looking at how we can make recommendations to start to effectively manage those impacts. On the bottom left-hand corner, what you see is the breakout of the occupancy by time of day. And that's the overall average occupancy for that entire collection area. And just so that everybody knows, not only are we recording tonight's presentation, but we will also ensure that this presentation and this recording is also posted onto the city's website. Looking at the calendar, I will hope that this will be posted within a week from today. We'll try to get it up sooner as well, but that way you'll have it for reference. This next slide is a summary for Saturday. And again, I don't think it comes as a surprise to most, given that this is a residential neighborhood. Our average occupancy on Saturday increases to 80%. And again, no surprise there, because on the weekend, the typical work schedule, a lot of people are home, and you can actually see that impact. And an important measure here is to show that at 5 a.m., the highest average occupancy in the RPP Zone 1 was 91%. And you can see that in RPP Zone number 2, the lowest average occupancy was 71%. And similar to the previous slide, you can see on the right side of the screen the breakdown by block face of what the average occupancy was by color coding. And on the left side, bottom part of the screen, is the breakout by the time the data was collected, as well as the zones. So this again is the detailed information, and this will help inform not only future recommendations, but also ongoing data collection. It's important that this is a great baseline also for future reference, so that the city will have this as a tool as they move forward. You can make policy adjustments and then go back and measure and evaluate and have something for comparison purposes. So something else that we use, and the reason why we utilize the license plate recognition technology, is to identify the length of stay. Is that, again, while I can't tell that that car belongs to Julie Dixon, what I can do is identify how long the cars are actually parking for. And just like on the previous screens, on the right side of the screen, you can see by block face the average length of stay by the color coding. And on the left side of the screen, you can actually see by the individual zones how long the cars are staying for. And you can see that obviously the peak being between 0 and 4 hours, and you can see that gradual decrease over time. But again, similar to the previous slides, Saturday, the length of stay tends to be a little bit longer. Again, hopefully a lot of people aren't at work on Saturdays. And so these numbers are very representative of what you would expect in a typical residential neighborhood. So before I get to this screen, I wanted to be sure that everyone understands that this is one of the exercises that we like to complete. And for those of you that attended the in-person meeting, we like to pass the parking magic wand around the room and ask that if you could change, fix, or improve anything about parking in San Fernando, what would you use it for? So keep that question in mind, because I just want to show you a couple more things here on the screen, because then we'll take a pause and open it up for dialogue. But I wanted to highlight that this is the contact information again for the online survey, available in both English and in Spanish. I've posted our contact email address. And then on the very bottom of the screen, this is the project webpage, sfcity.org/residential-parking. This is a great reference location so that you can access project information there. It's also a great place to go back and reference any updates for the project. And also we'll use the same methods to notify you of the next round of meetings. As you found out about this meeting, we're trying to take advantage of all areas of social media to make sure that you can receive information about this project. And please share this survey link with your neighbors and your friends, because the more feedback that we have, the better. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask my colleague Chisa, only because I haven't been able to monitor the chat. Chisa, are there any questions or comments that have been posted in the chat that I should be made aware of?
No comment in the chat.
Terrific. So what I would like to do is take a moment here to take this off screen so that I can actually see all of the names of our attendees. And what I would like to share before we start asking people for feedback is to recognize that everyone is entitled to their opinion, and their opinion may not be your priority. We just ask that we allow everyone to have an opportunity to share their feedback, even if it's different than your own, so that when we talk about making recommendations tied in to this project, we want to make sure that we receive as much feedback as possible. And what I'd love to do is first take the opportunity to see if anybody wanted to raise their hand, and then we can work on getting folks unmuted. If you haven't used Zoom before, on the bottom of your screen on the toolbar, there's a little heart with the word react. And if you click on that, the button that says raise hand is an option. And if you wanted to go ahead and raise your hand, I will be happy to call upon you. Is there anybody that wanted to share what they would change, fix, or improve about parking in San Fernando? And if you'd like to raise your hand, we'd be happy to work on getting you unmuted. I see a hand, and Marlene, I'm going to ask you if you can unmute yourself. Marlene, can you hear me okay? Marlene, I don't hear your audio. Hopefully you can hear me. Let me see here. It shows you're unmuted, Marlene. Is it possible that Marlene is in the Spanish translation room, Jennifer?
Oh no, in the chat it says she cannot unmute it, but in the chat we were asked a question from CJ. It says, how do we add permits in our streets? Some neighbors rent rooms and the tenants park outside.
So thank you for the question, CJ. This is one of the many things that we're actually going to be tackling as it relates to that. But if you're talking about an existing permit process, Isabella, would you like to explain to CJ how a resident in an existing permit zone goes about obtaining a parking permit?
Yes, so if you currently live in one of the two current residential parking districts that we have, you're able to either apply online to our permit counter or come in person to City Hall to come get your permit. As of right now, the permit is free. There is no price attached to it.
Thank you. And Marlene, do you want to just double check your audio on your actual computer or phone just to make sure? Sometimes I have my sound muted, but then you wouldn't be able to hear me. I'm sorry. I'm trying to come up with an idea here. Marlene, did you want to go ahead and chat, put something into the chat if that helps?
Yes, if you put a question in the chat, I'll be sure to read it out loud.
Yep. And wait, I see Carla. So Carla, give me one moment here. Let me just shift over. Bear with me 1 second. Multitasking with multiple things here. Let me find you. There we see. Carla, are you able to unmute yourself?
Hi, yes, good evening. I just have a question. So there are currently two parking permit zones in the city, right? How do we know if or when for our certain area or a certain neighborhood this will be implemented?
It's a great question, Carla. So right now, this is really the process in which we're going through, is to really determine what the future of residential parking management could look like or should look like in the city. So to hear back from residents on whether or not they think they need a permit program, whether we found out during the previous meeting, we had a resident who said, I don't think we should have a permit program. I have one today. Or like kind of right sizing whatever the program is. That's an important part of this conversation, is really navigating that process. And I saw a comment in the chat that said, how do we get this process? And that's actually exactly where we are today, is that we've got several permit zones today, and you may not live in one of those today. And your question may be, how do I get one of those? That's actually exactly what this process is going to help us navigate, is to help really determine how residential parking can and or should be managed throughout the city. And basically looking at the existing policies, whether or not there should be a charge for parking permits for those locations that have them. This is really that holistic look at the whole process. So Carla, hopefully that answered your question. And I think hopefully we also tackled the question in the chat. So I think, let me see, Rosario, I'm going to ask if you could unmute yourself. Bear with me. I clicked the wrong button. Hold on 1 second. Rosario, can you try to unmute yourself? There we go.
There you go. Hi. Good evening. I think going back to that question that you asked, what if we would think about what would make the parking situation more ideal?
Mhm.
I think one of the things that we have encountered is, and I'm pretty sure everybody's thinks about the same problem, is that there's just too many cars for the one property. And so, like, for example, our home, we're in I believe our zone is a multi unit zone. So not only can there be a ADU, but there could be apartment buildings built in this zone. And so we have properties that have a house and an apartment building, or they have like two homes, two townhomes, and there's not enough residential parking or even parking in the property itself. And then you get into the problem of that there's, like you said earlier, that there's multi-generational homes. So in one house, you can have 2 families. And then in the other house that's on the same property, you can have 2 more families.
Okay.
And then you get into, now there's 4 adults that drive vehicles. And so now that means each adult has a vehicle that they drive and they park it outside in the residential area because they don't have enough parking in their own personal driveway for so many vehicles.
Yeah.
And that kind of affects us because first of all, I can't park any car outside of my residence because they always have their cars parked there.
Mhm.
And then they don't get cited by the parking enforcement because they just move their cars around. So if they're gonna move one car, then they bring their other car, and they're gonna move the other car, and then they, so they kind of get past that rule of the car can only be there a certain amount of hours a day, or and so it makes it difficult sometimes when we have people over. They always have to park a block away because there is no parking. There's no parking on our street.
Right. That's exactly one of the things that we're hoping to navigate through the survey as well. And I see that Edith has commented about the musical cars. I do think we actually received that feedback as well in the previous meeting. And this is one of the things I want to highlight. I think it's important that everybody, as you're all residents, to hear this is there have been a lot of changes over the last several years in California at the state legislative side that has basically eliminated the requirements associated with parking with basically accessory dwelling units, for example. If you have a development within a half a mile of a transit stop, you don't have to provide any parking. So the challenge that you're describing in particular, Rosario, is one that basically feeds right into the way that California has basically now designed the new rules, the new laws, as it relates to the fact that the parking requirements are not required for those types of developments. And so I was thinking as you were describing it, is that, like you said, if you wanted to have friends over or to be able to, entertain, have dinner or barbecue, the reality is everybody's battling for that curbside. And then when you talk about the musical cars, in the last meeting, we also talked about people using their trash cans as placeholders, some folks putting chairs and or traffic cones out into the street. And we actually had code enforcement at last week's meeting, and it's possible they could even be here today. So forgive me, I don't have people on camera here today. But I think it's important to recognize that, there's a lot of territory to be covered, and the reality of kind of I call it the gamification of parking or parking roulette. That's kind of the challenge that we've obviously heard from many of your neighbors and, similar resident stories. So that's part of this process that we're trying to navigate, and some of the things that other communities have done to try to limit that access to the curb as well. So, and I see Carla put a comment. We unfortunately have the issue that people move our trash bins during collection so that they can park and then our trash doesn't get collected. Carla, we heard the similar commentary from us, other neighbors as well. So we've definitely taken note of that. I really do appreciate you sharing that too. So Rosario, thank you so much for sharing that as well. Did anyone else have that want to raise their hand or share a comment? Again, you're also welcome to use the chat. And Chisa, I just want to make sure I didn't miss any comments in the chat as well.
Nope.
Okay, perfect. Did anyone else want to raise their hand? I want to see, and I also want to look to our interpreter. I can see Veronica on the screen. And Veronica, I'm just looking to you for a thumbs up if you have anyone that has any questions in the Spanish translation room as well. So Veronica is shaking her head no.
No one has answered to me. I asked for that, and no one replies. I'm not sure if that one is in Spanish.
No
To be
worries. Well,
honest.
I will ask the person who is on that is named iPhone. I'm going to ask if you could unmute yourself, please. There you go.
Hi.
Can you hear
Hi,
us?
good evening. Yes, hi.
Hi.
So, I share the same concern as many of the other individuals on this call where there's multiple ADUs in one lot. There is a huge household size, and each of those homes have 7 vehicles, and there's only a household of 4. And during street cleaning, they're constantly moving their vehicles around, trying to find parking. So that creates an issue for a lot of residents here. I don't live in one of the zones where they have a parking program, but it'll be great if we can expand that throughout the city. Another concern that I have is that some neighbors conduct business where they are maybe in the business of selling vehicles, and so they bring vehicles that they're trying to sell, and they leave them out in the street for days. And sometimes it's more than 3 days. They're not abandoned vehicles, it's just they're just waiting to sell them.
Sell it. Yeah.
So that also creates a huge issue.
Oh,
So
sure.
just wanted to share.
I think some of your neighbors might have come to our previous meeting as well, because we
Mhm.
hear a very similar bit of
Yes.
too. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and it's definitely been taken note. The one thing I wanted to share with you is these are the types of things too that we can address and making sure the municipal codes address those types of challenges so that
Mhm.
enforcement can actually help enforce some of those policies as well. So thank you so much for your feedback tonight as well. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Very informative as well.
You. I want to take another opportunity to see if anyone else wanted to raise their hand. Oh, I see Rosario. Okay, Rosario, can you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Yeah. So a comment of, with I forgot who it was that mentioned about the cars being parked there multiple days. I think a thing with the city is if there's a way that we can facilitate the communication, I guess, between the residents and parking enforcement. That's been an issue that I've had, because again, going back to there just not being parking, there's been multiple times where my driveway gets blocked because people are just, again, trying to fit into places where they're 2 feet into my driveway and I can't get out.
Right.
And then I call parking enforcement, and they just don't come out. Or then it's after hours, and I think our after hours there is no parking enforcement. So I believe it's San Fernando PD, the ones that have to handle that.
Yep.
And I've had it too where we had came home, somebody was blocking our driveway, so we went to go grab food. So then I called PD. PD came and they didn't force the person to move the car. So it was just kind of like we ended up running errands because we just couldn't get into our driveway.
Your driveway.
Yeah, and I feel like
Wow.
there needs to be a more facilitated way for us to, I guess, file our grievances or have our grievances heard.
Yeah, no, for sure. And in fact, something Rosario, and I'm going to look to Isabella for this detail. One of the things that was a request at the last meeting, and I believe that it's posted on our project website, is the contact instructions for when you have a parking issue in the city. And I'm seeing Isabella nodding her head. And so when you go, and I'm going to ask Chisa if you could just type into the chat, Chisa, the project webpage for everybody. So
It's not posted yet on the project webpage. I'll be sure to get that up as soon as we can. But yes, there is a non-emergency number for parking enforcement. However, its effectiveness and whatnot, we can definitely discuss here in the project, and that can be something that we can always bring up.
Yeah, perfect. So we'll make sure that that gets posted, and thank you. And I see a couple of items in the chat. And yes, you can use the app to report parking issues. And that's another resource that you can use to be able to report those issues. And then let me just scroll up here a minute because we've had a couple of other ones. And I think it's Noemi that commented, no charge for permits defeats the purpose of a solution to our parking problem. There should be a charge for permits so people can be discouraged of having a lot of cars in the same household. And Noemi, the one thing I like to say is there's no such thing as free parking. So I couldn't agree with you more. but it'll be important for us to figure out what that balanced solution for the community does look like. So really appreciate that feedback. Make sure to get the survey posted out there and shared with your friends and neighbors. And in regards to calling the non-emergency number, thank you, Edith, for sharing about reporting vehicles that were parked for more than 72 hours. And CJ, I see your comment about neighbors using the driveway and the garage to fix cars, and that the family parks outside with 4 cars. And again, these are all factors that when we talk about from a code enforcement perspective as well, that we can obviously try to tackle. I want to reinforce, I appreciate that these are the neighbors that you live with. And I obviously don't want to see anybody creating any kind of neighborhood war over parking, mind you. But I also live in Southern California and can also appreciate all of the challenges that you're facing. And you can see that this will not be an easy fix for the city of San Fernando. And it's the reason why we are so appreciative of everybody coming out here tonight to share your thoughts and feedback. What I'd like to do for just one moment is I'm going to share my screen once again so that everyone can have the, and Isabella, can you see that okay? Great. You're the only person I can see on camera. I wanted everybody to just see the QR code again for both the English and Spanish survey. I wanted to highlight again our project email address and the project webpage, sfcity.org/residential-parking. And this is where you can find the updates and the referenced information that I was sharing here and mentioning in the previous comments. And I see that there's another comment in the chat. So if you'll all bear with me here, the screen limits what I can see. And I see on the iPhone, agree, paying for permits will also be a great way to generate income for the city. So one thing I like to highlight on this, I don't disagree that it's a great income resource, but because of Proposition 13, we can't create residential parking permits as another tax. So I want to highlight when we do talk about a residential parking permit program, I do agree there needs to be a cost because the program needs to pay for itself, but the city has to price it in a way to ensure that it's really right priced to cover the cost of the operation. So I want to take one more moment here to see if I see any more hands coming up. And I don't hear anything coming. Oh, I see another hand. Hold on one second, Carla. I'm trying to manage all of these different screens at the same time and keep this on. So Carla, I see, are you able to unmute yourself, Carla?
Hi, yes. I just have another question because we are talking about parking. So I'm just wondering in case, this kind of parking permit rolls out, will there be like additional construction added to streets, for example, like, certain streets will get repainted, or there'll be like signs that need to be put up? So just wondering.
Great question. So as we talk about the recommendations and any kind of changes or policy updates, that would coincide with any policies, postings, markings. I mentioned in the presentation, maybe identifying places where there might be some shared parking agreements. That would all tie into what these options are. There's some communities where they thought having markings on the street would help maybe kind of contain the cars, from spilling over into driveways. There's obviously costs associated with that, but right now we have, an open opportunity for all and any ideas. And it's the reason why I wanted to reinforce the survey to basically make sure that we can get as many voices shared in how this should look, how this should operate, how this could basically be run in the city. And so to that point, honestly, there's a lot of potential with what we can do. That's why we need to hear from all of you when it comes to that feedback. So thank you for that. I want to take one more moment here and see if anybody wants to raise their hand, if there's any more comments.
In the chat, there was a question, will the project be implemented through the whole city or just in certain areas? Just to clarify, this is the community engagement portion of the project. So we're taking suggestions, and we're going to come out with the recommendations early 2025. So that will, again, based on your guys' community feedback and then the surveys and the studies that we're doing, that we're going to determine whether it's a whole city thing or if it's just certain areas. So that is to be determined.
Thank you, Isabella. And it's important to recognize that when we showed you the study area, that's intended to be a representation, a sampling, so that way we'd have some baseline information to compare it against. So very great question, and kind of everything is to be determined based on your feedback. So with that, I want to ask one last time if anybody wanted to raise their hand or post any more comments into the chat.
Also, if you have the time, there is a sign-in sheet. I'll post it again if everyone can please click on it and make sure you sign in for this meeting. Thank you.
Yes, and then we'll have your email address to be able to send to you when we have the results of the survey and share with you the next round of meetings as well. So with that, I want to just take a moment to say thank you to everyone. I know this is a particularly busy time of the year. Many of you probably need to get dinner on the table and get people schooled and homework done and wrap up our work days or start our work days. So we just know that parking impacts you, and we appreciate your participation. And please share with everyone about the community surveys. And Chisa, can you remind me of when we are closing the survey and how long everything will be posted for?
We plan to have the survey closed sometime early January.
Perfect. So we'll navigate this through the holidays, and we'll be sure to post it on social media. But if you could please share this, post it on Nextdoor, on social media, at your neighborhood meetings. Maybe you go to a holiday potluck. Let everybody know we want to hear your feedback. So with that, I will wish everybody a happy holiday season, and thank you very much for coming tonight. Have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.